there's no doubt in my mind that that had a lot to do with a very, very tremendous change in his style of living.
The symptoms of his undiagnosed disorder were getting more and more apparent. He wouldn't shake hands or touch doorknobs. He began repeating instructions to aides in copious detail, and he became increasingly agitated when his orders weren't followed to the letter.
Regular people, when they started exhibiting the kinds of behaviors that Hughes was exhibiting, they were essentially called insane.
By 1957, there were very real concerns among Hughes' business associates and employees that the old man, as they'd begun to call him, was indeed going crazy. In classified memos, the FBI said he acted like a screwball paranoic, adding that he might even be capable of murder.
There was even talk about the possibility of having Howard Hughes committed.
In an unusual sequence of events that foretold of strange behavior to come, Hughes suddenly decided to marry a starlet he'd been seeing for a decade, Jean Peters.
There is a theory that Howard married Jean because if Howard Hughes was married, they wouldn't be able to commit him. It would be a wife that would have to make that decision. He reportedly asked Jean, "If we got married, would you ever do anything like that to me?" And she said, "No, absolutely not."
It was a surreal secret ceremony, completely arranged and choreographed by Hughes. He flew Jean and several personal aides to Tonopah, Nevada, and he insisted that everyone dress up like duck hunters, including the bride. Hughes didn't want anyone, especially reporters, to find out that he was getting married. The service was performed inside a local motel.
It was like guys in plaid shirts. Poor Jean Peters, the big date she'd been waiting for. The big day had finally arrived. They got married in the motel and flew back to Los Angeles.
Less than a year after his marriage, Hughes descended into one of the most bizarre episodes of his life. In December 1957, he told his personal aides that he wanted to screen some movies at a nearby studio called Nossex on Sunset Boulevard. Hughes stayed in the darkened screening room for more than 4 months, never leaving. He used a telephone to conduct business and ate a diet of chocolate bars and milk. But most of the time, he just sat in his own chair, often naked, watching movies, reel after reel, day after day. Hughes issued strict orders to his aides, writing instructions on yellow legal tablets. Do not look at him. Do not speak at him. Only respond when spoken to. Around Hughes were dozens of boxes of tissues which he continually stacked and rearranged.
There's a famous memo he wrote. It was called the Kleenex Directive. And it was a lengthy memo on how to use Kleenex to protect yourself from germs. And you're supposed to use 8 to 10 thicknesses of Kleenex in order to open a doorknob, for instance.
As his stay at Nossex stretched into months, Hughes relied more and more on his painkillers. His personal hygiene deteriorated rapidly, but at the same time he became more and more obsessed with avoiding germs, all manifestations of obsessive-compulsive disorder. In the spring of 1958, after 4 months, Hughes finally emerged from the screening room. By then his clothes were soiled and ragged. He hadn't bathed or shaved for months. He was a mess. The once charismatic public figure had become a pathetic recluse.
It has been surmised that what happened at Nossex was Hughes was having a massive nervous breakdown, but he didn't want to tell anybody, so he kind of, in a way, created his own asylum.
After leaving the screening room, Hughes checked into the Beverly Hills Hotel, where he lived in a bungalow for the next few years. He also rented many other rooms for his aides, wife, and various girlfriends.
1 year, I figured he spent $11 million at that hotel. Imagine.
At the hotel, Hughes relapsed into his screening room habits, sitting naked in the dark, covered only by a strategically placed pink hotel napkin. But even as his behavior grew stranger, Hughes somehow kept control of his amazing empire. The nerve center of Hughes' empire was here, 7000 Romaine Street in West Hollywood. Employees called it the Fortress. It was the repository of all Hughes' secret files and records, business and personal. Its main function was the telephone switchboard, which fielded all calls to Hughes 24 hours a day. Very few people were ever allowed inside Romaine Street.
When I went to get my check, they'd lower a fishing line from the second story, and I'd hook my statement on that, and then they'd throw out the check.
From this odd bastion, the Hughes empire grew more secretive and powerful. But because Hughes was never seen and was exceedingly difficult to pin down, some wondered if he was still in control, or even alive.
That was the point at which he pretty much became the most famous invisible man in America.
Few people knew that Howard Hughes was still running the show. But the richest man in America was about to come unstuck. At the close of the 1950s, Howard Hughes was increasingly described as a reclusive millionaire. But his business empire had grown so vast and powerful that his influence could not be underestimated. His interests included the Hughes Tool Company, his perennial cash cow, RKO, TWA, the Hughes Aircraft and Aerospace Companies, and vast real estate holdings. Hughes' government contracts were increasingly entwined with top-secret national defense programs during the Cold War. Spying and covert surveillance were trademarks of Hughes' technology. It also caused a certain measure of paranoia within the Hughes empire. In the late 1950s, Hughes made a series of surprising business moves. He dumped his longtime lieutenant Noah Dietrich and replaced him with a former FBI agent who had ties to the CIA, Robert Mayhew. It was the beginning of an unusual business relationship, because Hughes made sure they never met face to face.
And he said, Bob, I'm going to tell you exactly why it is you can't see me. He said, if you saw the way I have neglected myself, the conditions under which I am living, if you took one look at me, you could never represent me.
Under Mayhew, Hughes' personal security force rivaled many government agencies. Much of the spying was personal, having his girlfriends and key employees followed. But a good deal of surveillance was done to prevent Hughes from being served subpoenas involving various legal and business entanglements.
And we were a little worried. He had these big lawsuits and people looking for him with subpoenas. There was a reward for anyone who could deliver papers on him.
One of the great ironies is people started to think Hughes was paranoid. Oh, he's paranoid, he's crazy, he's, always thinks he's being followed. But in fact, the FBI had a tremendous dossier on Howard Hughes. Was he crazy? Yes, and for good reason. He was always being followed.
The FBI's interests were professional and personal. As one of the biggest military contractors, the government always suspected Hughes of profiteering and exerting undue influence on politicians. But the FBI was also concerned about his mental state, because so much of Hughes' business was tied to national defense. There was also his contentious fight to keep control of TWA, the airline he personally transformed from a regional puddle jumper to an international powerhouse.
The problems of TWA weighed tremendously upon him.
In 1960, Hughes was ordered by the courts to give up operational control of the airline because he was judged to have mismanaged its funds. But Hughes still maintained a majority of the company's